The Colorado wilderness stretched endlessly under the golden hues of the setting sun. John Miller, a rugged man in his late 30s with a neatly trimmed beard and deep brown eyes, walked cautiously through the dense forest. His boots crunched against the carpet of pine needles as he adjusted his backpack, a rifle slung across his shoulder. John wasn't a hunter by profession. He was a wildlife photographer with a deep love for nature. On this particular trip, he was scouting for bald eagles, hoping to capture their majesty on film. As he moved deeper into the woods, a faint, pitiful sound stopped him in his tracks. It wasn't the cry of any bird he recognized. His instincts, honed from years of experience, told him it was something in distress. Following the sound, he pushed aside the undergrowth and found himself staring at a small bobcat cub lying near the base of a fallen tree. The cub was in bad shape, its fur matted with dried blood, and a visible gash stretched across its hind leg. Its chest rose and fell weakly as it let out another feeble cry. John crouched down, his heart tightening. The little creature's golden eyes, filled with fear and exhaustion, met his. "Hey, buddy," John murmured, his voice soft and soothing. He slowly reached out, careful not to startle the cub. "You're hurt, huh? Let me help you." The cub flinched but didn't have the energy to flee. John took a moment to assess the situation. From the looks of it, the cub had been attacked, likely by a coyote or another predator, and had somehow managed to escape. Being alone in the wild at such a young age was a death sentence. John glanced around the forest. The sun was dipping lower, and the temperature was dropping. If he didn't act quickly, the cub wouldn't make it through the night. "All right," he muttered, mostly to himself. "We're doing this." He opened his backpack, pulling out a flannel shirt. With gentle hands, he wrapped the cub, cradling it against his chest. The cub gave a weak protest but soon settled, its small body trembling against John's warmth. The hike back to John's truck was slow and deliberate. Each step was careful to avoid jostling the injured animal too much. The forest, so vibrant and alive earlier, now felt ominously quiet as dusk crept in. John kept talking to the cub, his voice low and calm. "You're going to be okay, little guy," he said, glancing down at the bundle in his arms. "I'm going to take you home and patch you up. You'll see. You've got a fighter's spirit, don't you?" By the time he reached the truck, the first stars were twinkling in the darkening sky. John carefully placed the cub on the passenger seat, ensuring it was secure before driving off. His cabin wasn't far, just a 30-minute drive along a winding dirt road that cut through the mountains. The cabin was modest but cozy, nestled among towering pines. It had been John's sanctuary for years, a place where he could escape the chaos of the world and connect with nature. He carried the cub inside, setting it gently on the worn couch. Under the warm glow of a lamp, John got to work. He retrieved his first aid kit and cleaned the wound as gently as he could. The cub stirred and let out a soft growl of protest, but John's steady hands didn't falter. "There you go," he said, his voice soft. "Not so bad, right? You're a tough little guy." Once the wound was cleaned and bandaged, John wrapped the cub in a soft blanket and placed it near the fireplace. The heat seemed to soothe the tiny creature, and for the first time, its breathing steadied. John sat back with a sigh, exhaustion settling over him. He watched the cub, a small, fragile life that had fought to survive against the odds. "You're safe now," he murmured, leaning back in his chair. "I'll call you Max the survivor." And so, under the quiet watch of the stars, began the unlikely bond between a man and a wild creature, both drawn together by chance and the unyielding will to survive. The first night with Max was a restless one. John barely slept, his ears tuned to every soft whimper or shift from the tiny bundle near the fireplace. The cabin, usually so silent at night, seemed alive with the sound of the cub's labored breaths. Every noise pulled at John's heart, his mind running through a checklist of what more he could do to help. By morning, the room was filled with the scent of coffee brewing and the soft crackle of the fire. John sat on the floor next to Max, carefully observing him. The cub was still weak, but its eyes followed him now, a flicker of trust forming. "You're a fighter, huh?" John said, setting down his mug. "You've made it through the night. That's a good sign." He decided the next step was a visit to Dr. Ellen Carter, the town's veterinarian. Ellen had been a friend of John's for years and had a reputation for her no-nonsense approach to wildlife care. Loading Max into an old crate lined with towels, John drove into the small town of Pine Ridge, where everyone knew everyone else. Ellen's clinic was on the edge of town, a modest building with a hand-painted sign that read Pine Ridge Animal Care. As soon as John stepped inside, Ellen, a tall woman with sharp blue eyes and graying hair tied back in a ponytail, gave him a questioning look. "What have you gotten yourself into now, John?" she asked, wiping her hands on her scrubs. "I found him in the woods," John replied, setting the crate down gently. "He's hurt pretty bad. Thought I'd bring him to you before trying anything else." Ellen peered into the crate and let out a low whistle. "Well, I'll be damned. A bobcat kitten. Poor little thing's been through hell." She gestured toward an exam table. "Let's take a closer look." John watched as Ellen worked with practiced efficiency, her hands gentle but firm as she examined Max. She cleaned the wound again, applied a stronger antiseptic, and gave the cub a shot of antibiotics. "He's dehydrated and malnourished," Ellen said, her tone serious. "But he's a tough one. If you hadn't found him, he wouldn't have lasted another night." John nodded, relief washing over him. "So, what's the plan? Can I keep him while he heals?" Ellen gave him a long look. "Legally, you're skating on thin ice. Bobcats are wild animals, John. The authorities aren't exactly lenient about this kind of thing." "I'm not looking to tame him," John said firmly. "I just want to give him a chance to survive." Ellen sighed. "All right, but you'll need to follow my instructions to the letter. Diet, medication, care, everything. If anyone asks, he's a stray cat." "Deal," John said, a faint smile breaking through his serious expression. Back at the cabin, the days fell into a rhythm. John's mornings were spent preparing meals for Max, blended chicken, vitamins, and occasional supplements prescribed by Ellen. The cub's appetite grew steadily, and so did his energy. By the second week, Max was strong enough to explore the cabin. His movements were tentative at first, but curiosity soon overtook caution. He pawed at the rug, sniffed at the furniture, and even climbed onto John's lap during the quiet evenings. Their bond deepened with every interaction. John would talk to Max as if the cub understood him, sharing stories about his photography trips and the challenges of life in the wilderness. "You're a wild one, aren't you?" John said one evening as Max batted at a loose thread on his jeans. "But you've got a soft spot too, kind of like me." Despite the growing connection, John knew this arrangement wasn't permanent. Max was a wild animal, and the day would come when he'd have to make a difficult decision. But for now, he focused on the present, savoring every moment with the resilient creature he had saved. The cabin, once a solitary refuge, was now filled with life. Max's presence had transformed it, his playful antics and growing strength a constant reminder of the power of second chances. As the days turned into weeks, John couldn't help but wonder what the future held for Max and for himself. By the time spring arrived in Pine Ridge, Max had transformed. The once fragile cub who trembled by the fireplace was now a confident young bobcat, his golden coat gleaming with health. His lean, muscular frame and sharp, intelligent eyes were a testament to his recovery under John's care. The cabin had become his playground. John had reinforced parts of the furniture and removed anything breakable after one too many mishaps with Max's increasingly adventurous spirit. The bobcat's favorite spot was a high shelf near the window, where he could perch and survey the forest outside, his natural instinct sharpening. "Max, you've turned this place into your kingdom," John said one evening, watching as Max leapt gracefully from the shelf to the floor. "You've got the moves of a gymnast and the attitude of a king." The playful bobcat batted at John's bootlaces, a mischievous glint in his eyes. John couldn't help but laugh, the sound filling the cabin with warmth. Despite Max's domestication within the cabin, his wild nature was evident. John had built an enclosed outdoor area for Max to stretch his legs and practice hunting small prey like insects or the occasional mouse that wandered in. Observing Max stalking through the grass, John couldn't help but marvel at the duality of the animal, wild and untamed, yet deeply bonded to him. One afternoon, while Max was lounging on the windowsill, Ellen dropped by for a visit. Her visits had become less clinical over time, more about checking on the duo than Max's health. She leaned against the doorframe, her sharp eyes studying the bobcat. "He's growing into a fine specimen," Ellen said, crossing her arms. "But you know, John, this isn't going to last forever." John sighed, setting down the mug he'd been holding. "I know," he replied, his tone heavy. "I've been thinking about it a lot. He's thriving here, but he's not meant to live like this forever." Ellen nodded, her expression softening. "It's not an easy thing to admit, but you're giving him the best shot at life he could have had. You're doing right by him." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of Max pouncing onto a pile of firewood near the door. He looked up at them, ears twitching, as if he knew they were talking about him. Ellen chuckled. "He's got a presence. I'll give him that," she said. "But have you thought about what's next?" "I've been researching sanctuaries," John admitted. "Places where he can live freely but still be protected. It's a hard decision, though. Letting go." His voice trailed off. Ellen placed a hand on his shoulder. "You'll know when it's time." As the weeks passed, Max's confidence and independence grew. He started spending more time in the outdoor enclosure, his movements fluid and powerful. John often sat nearby, watching as Max climbed the trees, his natural instincts taking over. It was both awe-inspiring and bittersweet. One evening, as they sat by the fireplace, John spoke softly to Max, who was curled up at his feet. "You're becoming the animal you were meant to be," he said, his voice tinged with emotion. "And as much as it pains me, I know I have to let you go someday." Max lifted his head, his piercing gaze meeting John's. For a moment, it felt as if the bobcat understood him, as if the bond they shared transcended words. John reached down, running a hand over Max's soft fur. "You'll always be a part of me, Max," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "No matter where you go." The fire crackled in the silence that followed, the weight of the future hanging in the air. John knew the day was coming when he'd have to say goodbye, but for now, he focused on the present, cherishing every moment with the remarkable creature that had changed his life forever. The first hint of summer brought longer days and warmer nights to the Colorado wilderness. Max had grown into a fully independent bobcat, his every movement exuding strength and confidence. But as much as John cherished their bond, the signs were clear. It was time to make a decision. John sat on the porch one evening, nursing a cup of black coffee as the sun dipped below the horizon. Max prowled the edge of the enclosed outdoor space, his golden eyes fixed on the distant tree-line. The sight struck a chord deep within John. Max wasn't meant to live confined, even in this carefully crafted habitat. The next morning, John drove into Pine Ridge to visit Ellen. The small town bustled with its usual rhythm, locals exchanging greetings at the general store, children riding bikes down Main Street. But John's thoughts were elsewhere. At the clinic, Ellen greeted him with her usual no-nonsense demeanor. "I've been expecting you," she said, gesturing for him to follow her into her office. John sank into a chair, his hands clasped tightly. "He's ready," he said finally. "More than ready. I've been looking into sanctuaries, and there's one in Montana that specializes in rehabilitating big cats. They have the space and resources he needs." Ellen leaned back in her chair, nodding thoughtfully. "It's the right call, John. He's done as much growing as he can with you. But it's not going to be easy, is it?" "No," John admitted, his voice breaking slightly. "He's been my shadow for months. Letting him go feels like losing a part of myself." Ellen gave him a reassuring look. "You're not losing him. You're giving him what he needs, a chance to thrive in his natural environment. That's the best kind of love you can give. The arrangements were made over the next few days. The Montana Wildlife Sanctuary was eager to accept Max, praising John for his efforts in saving and nurturing the bobcat. They assured him that Max would have acres of open space, skilled caretakers, and even the possibility of interacting with other bobcats. When the day arrived, John loaded Max into the same crate he had used to bring him to Ellen's clinic months before. This time, however, the atmosphere was heavy with emotion. Max seemed to sense the tension, his golden eyes watching John intently. "You've got a big adventure ahead of you, buddy," John said, his voice thick with emotion. "A place where you can run free, hunt, and be the animal you were born to be." The drive to Montana was long, the miles stretching out under a pale blue sky. John spoke to Max often, as if trying to reassure himself as much as the bobcat. "You're going to love it there," he said. "Open fields, tall trees, no fences. It's what you deserve." When they finally arrived at the sanctuary, John was struck by its beauty. Rolling hills, dense forests, and wide-open spaces stretched as far as the eye could see. The staff greeted him warmly, their respect for Max's journey evident in their words and actions. As they opened the crate, Max hesitated for a moment before stepping out onto the soft grass. He sniffed the air, his ears swiveling as he took in the unfamiliar sounds of his new home. John crouched down, watching him with a mix of pride and heartache. "This is it, Max," he said softly. "This is where you're meant to be." One of the sanctuary staff members, a young woman named Claire, approached John. "He'll be well taken care of here," she assured him. "You've done something incredible for him." John nodded, his eyes never leaving Max. "He's special," he said simply. As the staff led Max deeper into the sanctuary, John stood by the fence, watching until the bobcat disappeared into the trees. A profound sense of loss washed over him, but it was accompanied by a quiet certainty. He had done the right thing. Driving back to Colorado, the cabin felt emptier than ever. The absence of Max was palpable, but John took solace in knowing that Max was where he belonged. It was a painful decision, but one made out of love, a testament to the unbreakable bond between man and animal. The cabin felt eerily silent without Max. The usual sounds, his soft growls, the rustle of his movements as he explored, the occasional thud of something knocked off a shelf, were gone. John Miller sat at the kitchen table, his hands wrapped around a mug of coffee that had long gone cold. He stared out the window at the empty outdoor enclosure, its stillness a stark contrast to the life it had once held. For weeks, John tried to adjust to the quiet, but it was harder than he'd anticipated. Every corner of the cabin seemed to remind him of Max. The scratches on the floor where the bobcat had pounced during play, the chewed edge of the old rug near the fireplace, and even the shelf Max had claimed as his throne. Each mark was a memory, a testament to the bond they had shared. One evening, John received a call from Claire, the sanctuary caretaker. Her warm voice carried through the phone. "Hi, John. I just wanted to give you an update on Max." John's heart lifted. "How's he doing?" "He's adjusting well," Claire said. "He's been exploring the sanctuary, testing his boundaries. We've also introduced him to another bobcat, a female named Luna. They seem to be getting along." John couldn't help but smile. "That's good to hear. He deserves that kind of life." "He does," Claire agreed. There was a brief pause before she added, "I can tell you really cared for him, John. He's lucky to have had you." After the call, John sat in the quiet cabin, feeling a bittersweet mix of relief and longing. Max was thriving, just as he had hoped, but the void left in his life was undeniable. A week later, John decided to revisit the woods where he had first found Max. It was a way of seeking closure, to connect with the place where their story had begun. The forest was alive with the sounds of nature, birds chirping, leaves rustling in the breeze. But there was no sign of the small, injured cub he had rescued months ago. As he wandered, he found the fallen tree where Max had been lying. The memory of that day came flooding back, the golden eyes filled with fear, the trembling body wrapped in his flannel shirt. John knelt by the spot, running his fingers over the moss-covered bark. "You've come so far, Max," he murmured. "I'm proud of you." The trip brought him a sense of peace he hadn't expected. Returning to the cabin, John began to focus on his photography again. He ventured deeper into the wilderness, capturing the beauty of the landscape, the animals, and the changing seasons. Each photo felt like a tribute to the connection he had shared with Max, a way of preserving their story. Months passed, and though the ache of separation never fully disappeared, it became a part of John's life, woven into his daily routine. He started to correspond more frequently with Claire, eager for updates on Max's progress. Each report brought a mixture of pride and nostalgia. One day, a letter arrived from the sanctuary. Enclosed was a photograph of Max, now fully grown, lounging under a tree in the sanctuary's vast expanse. His coat shone in the sunlight, his golden eyes as piercing as ever. On the back of the photo, Claire had written, "He's thriving. Thank you for giving him this chance." John placed the photo on the mantel above the fireplace, next to a picture of his late parents. It was a reminder of the profound impact Max had had on his life and the lessons he had taught him about love, resilience, and the power of letting go. Though the separation was painful, John knew it had been the right decision. Max was where he belonged, living the life he was meant to live. And in the quiet moments, as John sat by the fire or walked through the woods, he felt the presence of the bobcat who had forever changed his world. The years rolled on in Pine Ridge, each season bringing its own rhythm to the small town and the surrounding wilderness. John Miller's life had settled into a quieter pace, yet the memories of Max were ever present. The photo of the bobcat, now fully grown and thriving at the Montana sanctuary, remained on the mantel, a silent witness to the passing days. John had thrown himself into his work, his photography gaining recognition beyond Pine Ridge. His portfolio, rich with images of Colorado's wildlife and rugged landscapes, drew attention from magazines and conservation organizations. Despite his success, John often felt that his best work had come during the months Max had been part of his life. Those photos, raw and intimate, captured the essence of survival, trust, and the fragile connection between humans and nature. Though the ache of separation had softened, John found himself wondering about Max more often as time went on. The updates from the sanctuary became less frequent, but each one was a reminder of the impact their bond had left. Claire continued to assure him that Max was thriving, fully integrated into the sanctuary and living as wild a life as possible within its protective boundaries. On quiet evenings, John would sit by the fire, sipping coffee and reflecting on how much had changed since that day in the forest. The cabin, once a place of solitude, now felt like a home that had been shared. The marks Max had left, scratches on the furniture, the chewed-up rug, remained untouched, preserved like artifacts of a cherished time. One summer, John received a letter from the Montana Wildlife Sanctuary. Inside was an invitation to an anniversary event celebrating their conservation work and the animals they had saved. It included a personal note from Claire. "John, we'd love to have you join us. Max is still here and doing wonderfully. I think it would mean a lot, for both of you, to see each other again." The letter sat on the table for days as John wrestled with the decision. Part of him feared that seeing Max after so long might reopen old wounds. But another part, the part that had always believed in their bond, felt a deep longing to go. When the day arrived, John packed his truck and set out on the long drive to Montana. The familiar miles stretched before him, the open road giving him time to reflect. He thought about the first time he had brought Max to the sanctuary, the weight of that decision still fresh in his memory. This trip, however, felt different. It was a journey of reconnection, not farewell. The sanctuary was as beautiful as he remembered, with its rolling hills and wide open spaces. Claire greeted him warmly at the entrance, her smile genuine. "It's good to see you, John," she said, shaking his hand. "You made it." "It's been a long time," John replied, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. "How is he?" Claire's eyes softened. "He's as magnificent as ever. Come on, I think he'll know you." As they walked through the sanctuary, John felt his heart quicken. They stopped at a large enclosure where a familiar figure stood, poised and powerful. Max. The bobcat's golden eyes scanned his surroundings with the same intensity John remembered, his body lean and strong from years of living in the sanctuary's wild expanse. "Max," John called softly, his voice catching in his throat. The bobcat's ears twitched at the sound, and his gaze locked onto John. For a moment, there was stillness, a charged silence as the two regarded each other. Then, to John's astonishment, Max bounded forward, stopping just short of the fence. His movements were fluid, but there was something unmistakably familiar in the way he approached, his tail flicking in recognition. John knelt by the fence, his hands gripping the metal as he spoke. "Hey, buddy. It's me. Do you remember?" Max let out a low, rumbling growl, not a warning, but a sound of acknowledgement. He pressed his face close to the fence, and John reached out, his fingers brushing the coarse fur. Emotion welled up inside him, the years of separation melting away in that moment. Claire, standing a few feet away, watched with awe. "I've never seen him react like this," she said softly. "It's like he never forgot you." John smiled through the tears that blurred his vision. "I never forgot him either." That evening, as the sun set over the sanctuary, John sat near Max's enclosure, sharing the same quiet companionship they once had in the cabin. The years apart hadn't diminished their bond. It had only deepened it, proving that some connections are truly unbreakable. The drive back to Colorado was filled with a bittersweet mix of emotions. Reuniting with Max, even briefly, had reignited memories John thought he had tucked away for good. Seeing the bobcat thriving was a profound relief, but it also left him with an aching realization. No matter how much time passed, their bond would remain an indelible part of him. Back in Pine Ridge, life returned to its usual rhythm, but Max was never far from John's thoughts. He often found himself staring at the photo Claire had given him during his visit. A snapshot of Max lounging under a tree, his golden eyes as sharp and watchful as ever. Each time he looked at it, John felt an almost magnetic pull, a longing to do more, to stay connected in some way. One evening, as John sifted through his mail, he came across an envelope bearing the sanctuary's logo. Inside was a handwritten note from Claire. "John, I hope this finds you well. Max continues to thrive here, but I wanted to share something exciting. We're working on a new initiative to create larger, open-range habitats for our big cats, including Max. It's a big project, and we could use support from people like you who understand what these animals mean to us. Let me know if you'd like to be involved. Warm regards, Claire." John read the letter twice, then a third time. The idea of contributing to Max's continued well-being and that of other animals at the sanctuary struck a chord. He picked up the phone and dialed the number at the bottom of the letter. "Claire, it's John," he said when she answered. "Tell me more about this project." Over the next hour, Claire explained the sanctuary's ambitious plan to expand their habitats into neighboring land, creating spaces that closely mimicked the animals' natural environments. For Max, this meant acres of untouched forest, complete with streams, rocky outcrops, and dense undergrowth for exploring and hunting. "It sounds incredible," John said, his mind racing with possibilities. "How can I help?" Claire hesitated before replying. "We're trying to raise funds for the project, but it's not just about money. We're looking for people who can tell these animals stories, help others understand why they're worth saving." John knew immediately how he could contribute. His photography, which had been his passion and profession for years, was the perfect medium to showcase the beauty and importance of wildlife conservation. "I'll do it," he said firmly. "I'll photograph the sanctuary, the animals, the habitats, whatever you need to help raise awareness." Over the next few weeks, John threw himself into the project with a renewed sense of purpose. He traveled back to Montana with his camera gear, spending days at the sanctuary capturing images of its residents. Max, of course, became a central focus of his work. John's lens seemed to draw out the essence of the bobcat's spirit, wild, resilient, and deeply connected to the natural world. During his time at the sanctuary, John also reconnected with Max on a personal level. Though they were separated by the enclosure's barriers, their interactions felt as meaningful as ever. Max would often approach the fence when John arrived, watching him with those piercing golden eyes as he worked. One afternoon, as John photographed Max lounging on a rocky outcrop, Claire approached him. "You know, he seems happier when you're around," she said, her voice light but thoughtful. "It's like he knows he's part of something bigger when you're here." John lowered his camera and glanced at Max. "Maybe he does. Or maybe I'm the one who feels that way." The project culminated in a gallery exhibit in Denver, where John's photographs were displayed alongside stories of the sanctuary's animals. The event drew conservationists, wildlife enthusiasts, and donors, all moved by the images and the message behind them. Max's photos, in particular, became a centerpiece of the exhibit, symbolizing the importance of second chances for animals displaced by human actions. As the gallery buzzed with conversation, Claire approached John, a glass of wine in hand. "You've done something amazing here, John," she said. "Because of this, we're closer than ever to making the new habitats a reality." John smiled, a deep sense of fulfillment washing over him. "It's all for Max," he replied, "and every animal like him." The exhibit not only raised funds, but also rekindled John's passion for advocacy. Max had not only been a part of his life, but had also inspired him to use his talents to make a lasting impact. The day finally came for the sanctuary to unveil the new, expanded habitats. John had been invited to witness the moment Max and several other big cats would be introduced to their sprawling new home. He couldn't resist the opportunity, not only to see Max again, but also to witness the culmination of the work he had poured his heart into over the past months. The sanctuary buzzed with excitement. Staff members and donors gathered near the entrance to the new habitat, a massive stretch of land bordered by dense forests, rocky outcrops, and meandering streams. It was the most natural environment the sanctuary had ever created, an ideal space for the animals to rediscover their instincts while remaining protected. John stood near Claire as the gates to the old enclosure were opened. One by one, the animals stepped into the new terrain, their movements tentative at first but quickly growing more confident. Max was among the last to emerge, his golden coat gleaming in the afternoon sun. He paused at the threshold, his sharp eyes scanning the unfamiliar terrain. "There he is," Claire whispered beside John, her voice tinged with admiration. John nodded, unable to take his eyes off Max. The bobcat stepped forward slowly, his ears swiveling as he listened to the rustle of the trees and the trickle of water nearby. Then, as if sensing the freedom ahead, Max broke into a graceful run, leaping onto a rocky ledge and surveying his new domain. The sight filled John with a bittersweet pride. This was what Max had always deserved, to live as he was meant to, unencumbered by the constraints of enclosures or the shadows of the past. Yet a part of John couldn't help but feel the pang of separation anew. After the initial excitement, the crowd began to disperse, leaving John alone near the edge of the habitat. He stayed behind, watching Max explore the vast expanse. As the bobcat moved, he seemed to catch a familiar scent in the air. His head lifted, and his sharp gaze locked onto John's. "Max," John called softly, his voice carrying over the quiet. The bobcat froze, his ears flicking forward. For a moment, there was no movement, just the charged silence of recognition. Then, with a sudden burst of energy, Max bounded toward the fence separating the viewing area from the habitat. He stopped just short of it, his eyes fixed on John. John crouched by the fence, his hands gripping the metal as he spoke. "Hey, buddy, it's me." Max let out a low, rumbling growl, not of warning but of familiarity. He paced along the fence, his tail flicking, before sitting down and leaning slightly toward John's outstretched hand. John didn't touch him. He knew better than to overstep the boundaries of Max's wild nature, but the connection between them was palpable. Claire approached quietly, her face alight with awe. "He remembers you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. John smiled, his throat tight with emotion. "I think he always will." They stayed like that for what felt like hours, John speaking softly to Max while the bobcat listened, his golden eyes never wavering. The reunion wasn't just a meeting of old friends. It was a testament to the unbreakable bond they had formed, a connection that had transcended time and distance. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Max finally rose and padded back into the forest. John watched him go, a mix of pride and longing in his chest. "He's home now," Claire said gently, placing a hand on John's shoulder. John nodded, his gaze still fixed on the trees. "And so am I." The reunion marked a turning point for John. Max was no longer the fragile cub he had rescued or the growing bobcat he had nurtured. He was a symbol of resilience, freedom, and the enduring power of love and care. And though their lives had taken different paths, their story remained intertwined, a bond that neither time nor distance could erase. The months following the emotional reunion with Max brought John a profound sense of peace. Though the visits to the sanctuary weren't as frequent as he would have liked, each trip was a chance to reaffirm the bond they shared. Claire and the sanctuary staff often commented on the unique connection between John and Max, a relationship that had transcended the boundaries between man and wild animal. On one crisp autumn morning, John decided to visit Max again, bringing along his camera. The sanctuary's expanded habitat had flourished in the months since its opening. The dense forests, winding streams, and rocky terrain had become a haven for the animals, offering them the freedom to live as naturally as possible while remaining safe from external threats. As John approached the familiar enclosure, Claire greeted him with a warm smile. "He'll be out soon," she said, gesturing toward the wooded area. "He seems to know when you're here." John chuckled, shaking his head. "He always did have a way of surprising me." A few minutes later, Max appeared, emerging from the trees with the same grace and confidence John had seen during their reunion. The bobcat's golden eyes scanned the area until they landed on John. Without hesitation, Max padded toward the fence, his tail flicking in what John could only describe as excitement. "Hey there, buddy," John called, crouching near the fence. "Good to see you." Max approached, pacing along the barrier, his body language relaxed but alert. John snapped a few photos, capturing the bobcat's regal posture and the intense focus in his eyes. But after a while, he set the camera aside, preferring to simply be present in the moment. "I think about you all the time," John said softly. "Every time I see a bobcat in the wild or hear about someone rescuing an animal, I think about how lucky I was to find you that day." Claire joined him after a while, leaning against the fence as she watched Max. It's not just him who remembers. Every time you visit, the other staff talk about how different he acts. It's like he's showing off for you, in his own way." John smiled. "I like to think we left an impression on each other." As the day wore on, John stayed by the fence, watching Max explore his domain. The bobcat leapt effortlessly from rock to rock, stalked imaginary prey in the undergrowth, and occasionally paused to glance back at John, as if making sure he was still there. Before leaving, John spent a few quiet moments with Claire in the sanctuary's main office. They talked about the future of the sanctuary and the ongoing efforts to expand its reach. "You've been such a big part of this place, John," Claire said. "Not just with Max, but with everything you've done. Your photography, your stories, your support. It's made a difference." John nodded, his expression thoughtful. "It feels good to know that something we started together has had this kind of impact." As he drove back to Pine Ridge that evening, the mountains bathed in the soft glow of the setting sun, John felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. Max had come into his life unexpectedly, and their journey together had changed him in ways he could never have imagined. Through their bond, he had found purpose, not only in helping Max, but in dedicating himself to the larger cause of wildlife conservation. Though their lives were now separate, John knew their connection was unbreakable. Max's presence lingered in his heart, a constant reminder of the resilience of the wild, the beauty of second chances, and the extraordinary things that can happen when trust and care cross boundaries. Winter came early to Pine Ridge, blanketing the forests and mountains in a thick layer of snow. John Miller stood on his cabin's porch, sipping a steaming mug of coffee as he looked out over the pristine landscape. The chill in the air was sharp, but it didn't bother him. Over the years, he had grown accustomed to the quiet stillness of winter, a season that often brought introspection and a renewed appreciation for the life he had built. This year, however, felt different. The sanctuary's success had inspired John to take on a more active role in wildlife conservation. His photography had become more than a profession. It was a way to tell stories, to raise awareness about the importance of protecting animals like Max. His recent gallery exhibit had sparked partnerships with several conservation organizations, and offers for collaborative projects began to roll in. One such offer came from Claire. The sanctuary was planning a series of workshops to educate the public about their mission, and Claire wanted John to lead a photography segment. The idea thrilled him. It was an opportunity to combine his love for wildlife with his passion for teaching. On a crisp January morning, John loaded his truck with gear and headed back to the Montana Wildlife Sanctuary. As he drove the familiar route, his mind wandered to the first time he had brought Max here. That trip had been one of the hardest moments of his life, but now, returning felt like a full-circle moment, a chance to continue the work they had started together. The sanctuary was bustling with activity when John arrived. Volunteers and staff moved about, preparing for the weekend workshops. Claire greeted him at the gate, her cheeks flushed from the cold. "Glad you made it," she said. Her smile warmed despite the freezing temperature. "We've got a lot of eager participants ready to learn from you." "I'm ready," John replied, his voice steady. "Let's do this." The workshop was held in a large, heated tent near the sanctuary's main office. Inside, a group of participants of all ages gathered, their excitement palpable. John began by sharing the story of Max, the rescue, the recovery, the bond they had formed, and the decision to give him a second chance at life in the sanctuary. He spoke with passion, his words weaving a narrative that captivated the room. "You don't just photograph wildlife," he told the group. "You connect with it. You tell its story. That's what makes people care." After the lecture, John led the group into the field, teaching them how to capture the essence of the animals they photographed. They visited several habitats, including the expansive new area where Max now lived. Though Max kept his distance that day, John spotted him lounging on a rocky ledge, his golden coat blending seamlessly with the winter landscape. John pointed him out to the group, his voice filled with pride. "That's Max. He's the reason I'm here today." The workshop was a resounding success, and the sanctuary raised significant funds from the event. As the weekend came to a close, Claire approached John, her expression thoughtful. "You've got a gift, John," she said. "Not just for photography, but for connecting people to something bigger. Have you ever thought about doing this full-time?" John chuckled. "You mean give up my quiet life in Pine Ridge?" Claire smiled. "Not entirely, but maybe you could split your time. We could use someone like you, a storyteller who's lived the reality of what we're trying to protect." The idea lingered in John's mind long after he returned home. He loved his life in Pine Ridge, but the thought of dedicating more time to conservation work excited him. It felt like the natural progression of his journey, a new chapter, inspired by Max and the lessons he had taught him. One snowy evening, as John sat by the fire, he picked up his camera and stared at the photo of Max on the mantel. The bobcat had not only changed his life, but had also given him a purpose he hadn't known he needed. "I guess this is what you were preparing me for," John said aloud, a small smile playing on his lips. And so, with a renewed sense of purpose, John began to plan the next phase of his life. A life dedicated not just to documenting the wild, but to protecting it. ensuring that stories like Max's could continue to inspire and remind the world of the extraordinary connections between humans and nature. Leave your like, subscribe to the channel, activate the notification bell, and if you've watched until now, comment, "I watched until here," and share your thoughts about this story. Oh, and don't forget to watch the next video that appears on the end screen. It's super exciting.